because what happens is that a scientist comes up with a theory which is based on certain assumptions, and then other scientists will challenge that. Notice that it's still Einstein's theory of relativity after 107 years. It's still Darwin's theory of evolution after 150 years, because there's other scientists have a lot of questions that just don't fit. But what happened with what's called the anthropogenic global warming theory was it became a fact almost instantly. And Richard Lindzen at MIT, who's also been in the forefront and of both the charge and the insult and getting the insults, he said a long time ago the consensus was reached before the research was even begun. Now, with Einstein as an example, one of the assumptions that his formula is based on is that nothing can go faster than the speed of light. Well, there are scientists that are saying, look, we're finding things going faster than the speed of light. If that turns out to be true, then Einstein's theory has either got to be rewritten or thrown out. Well, with the anthropogenic global warming, the fundamental assumption is that if CO2 increases in the atmosphere, the temperature will go up. In every single record that we've got for any duration of any time period, the temperature increases before the CO2, not as they assume. And by the way, that assumption's built into their computer models, which is why they are consistently wrong. And I remember in 1991 when Jousel, the Frenchman, came out with the ice core from Antarctica, which is now Gore's got it in his movie. He said, and in fact, he very cleverly separated the CO2 and the temperature, because when you put them together, you see that the temperature is causing the CO2 to change, not the other way around.
And they knew that, but let me stop you again.
Yeah.
About 5 years ago, a University of Chicago historian wrote a book saying the Founding Fathers were anti-gun, only 10% of colonial families owned guns, the Second Amendment is not an individual right to keep and bear arms. Then top historians actually went to the church records areas, to the university record areas, and found out it was all a fraud, all made up by the anti-gun lobby funded by the Rockefellers, the usual suspects. Now, so there's academic fraud everywhere when government and the Rockefellers and the UN are involved. That professor lost his tenure and was removed. Okay? Yep. So shouldn't we see these professors caught lying at bare minimum lose their tenure?
Absolutely, and I fought this, but when I was in the university, there were some of my colleagues doing all sorts of terrible things, and it was just simply a cover-up. And for example, at the University of Guelph, I pointed out 100 years, not one person with tenure has ever been fired. You telling me in 100 years that not one of them did anything that was criminal or wrong? And in the university contracts with faculty, there is nearly always what's called a moral turpitude clause. And this is, and I used to joke about it. I said, if I'm going to get fired, I want to be caught naked in my office with 100 female students and get fired for moral turpitude that way. But nobody's ever challenged it. And I suspect when you look at the contracts that these people have with the universities, there's going to be sufficient vehicles by which they can be brought to justice.
Well, bare minimum, I mean, justice says this has to happen, because here they are secretly trying to cut people's funding, to persecute, to keep scientists from being published in journals, which destroys their careers. Yeah. I mean, and then they're in the London Guardian today, whining and complaining, calling themselves victims of persecution when they are the persecutor. In fact, here's the article. Leaked emails mark dangerous shift in climate denial strategy. And the article by Mark Lannis is written as if the people that put the emails out are desperate, evil frauds, and it accuses all of us who are criticizing them and questioning their I mean, these socialists, these globalists, these eugenicists, they're not liberals. They're a cult of control freaks who love lording over everyone and bossing everybody around and acting like they have all the answers. And to read this article, I mean, it's so sick. And now to find out that the BBC 5 weeks before was sent these leaked or hacked, however they came out. The media said hacked. I guess they said hacked so they can block their release later. Probably were just leaked. That the BBC wouldn't discuss them. I mean, this is incredible.
Well, and Andrew Revkin used that argument. He said we wouldn't comment on this because it was leaked documents, but they'd written other stories earlier where stuff was leaked in a story that favored them, and they didn't hesitate to use it. But by the way, what you're talking about with regard to this victim defense, that's the modern thing that's called victimology. And it becomes a standard defense that the person becomes the victim. I mean, comedians make jokes about it. Is that wonderful thing that the lawyer defending a guy that was on trial for murdering both his parents, and he pleaded for clemency on the grounds that the guy was an orphan. You know, this is the kind of mentality that these people use.
Well, here's one. He hired one of the fanciest criminal lawyers in New York, the guy that on record tried to extort and defraud and blackmail David Letterman. He's doing a victim defense, saying David Letterman was mean, doing this to his girlfriend, dating her, and that he was just trying to sell him a movie script. I mean, the spin that comes out of these people.
Yeah, and of course, I like Glenn Beck's classification of them as progressives. And that gets you away from this right wing, left wing, and all of that. And of course, you know, by the way, I refer to the scandals in Scandinavia because should these people now have their Nobel Prizes withdrawn? I mean, certainly Gore and the IPCC got them on the basis of all this false information. And as you know, there were screams at the time about that.
But see, it's the big global money that wants all this. That's why they're giving awards to their pet scientists that push this. That's why we'll never get justice. But here's another issue. As you know, in Canada, the U.S., Europe, England, Australia, New Zealand, everywhere, they're brainwashing the kids in school. Far worse than just we have warming, but that we're all dead and, you know, kids have to commit suicide at 11 when their carbon credits run out. ABC News. You can't make up this, how sick these people are. Right. We've got to really go into the schools and say, this is a proven fraud. Stop teaching it. Yeah.
Well, of course, I've been involved in one of the things that I've tried to do in my life, Alex, is I don't think that one has a right to be hypercritical. Obviously, as a human being, you're entitled to your right to your own opinions. But to go public with criticism, unless you're willing to get involved and try to do something about it, I don't think that you should be very cautious. I've been involved in K to 12 and through the university, in other words, the whole education system throughout my career. And what triggered it was that I discovered that the colleagues in my department at the university didn't even know what textbooks were being used in the high school. And I said, well, how can you possibly deal with the students, which are your raw material, if you don't know what they know and where they're coming from? So I've dealt with this. A thing called agriculture in the classroom, ag in the classroom, where the teachers, especially in the social studies areas, and their tendency to be left-wing, using that classroom to push their own ideology.
Stay there. Stay there.
Really
All right, we're going to go to your phone calls. Nolan, Don, Gregory, and Nigel in Japan. Let's go to Nigel first. You're on the air with climatologist Dr. Tim Ball, persecuted, one of the most persecuted people out there because he was so dead on with his research and now completely vindicated in spades. Caller in Japan, you're on the air with our guest. Go ahead.
Hello. I just want to say that I don't want to contradict with the cutting of the rainforest too much, but the trees do take hundreds of years to grow, and that when they do get cut down, they don't. The whole ecosystem does get destroyed. There's so many animals that depend on that very ancient.
Yeah, that was last hour's guess. The point is the globalist, Al Gore, actually with Occidental Petroleum, was cutting down rainforest, but using it as a way to get donations for themselves. Clearly, that's more of an environmental threat than carbon dioxide. And genetic engineering, open air, cross species, there are environmental issues. The point is the groups running all this could care less about that. Dr. Tim Ball.
Well, And of course, one of the things that triggered the increase of cutting of the rainforest was the World Bank giving money to Brazil on condition that they cleared the forest and developed their agriculture to form a good agricultural base to the economy, just as in the U.S. Once they stopped that funding, the level of cutting dropped dramatically.
Again, every time I look, it's the globalists that are actually hurting the earth, and then they create the crisis and then offer the solution.
Yeah, exactly. And not only that, but there was no real measure of how much forest had been cut. And a few Swedish experts said, let's get a measure of this. And it turned out that the numbers given were by accountants at the World Bank who went to the scientists and said, well, how much forest is cut and how much is going to cut this year? And they said, we don't know. So they made up a number. And it turned out that the number that was in circulation and used by everybody was at least 85% in excess of the actual number.
Yeah, Nigel, I agree with you that destroying old growth needs to be controlled, because that's regrowth is different than old growth. But anything else, Nigel?
Yes, I highly recommend seeing rebelswanted.com, because there's so much information on there about the environment, and the health section is so important.
All right. We appreciate your call, sir. Thank you. Nolan in Texas, going as many calls as possible. Nolan, you're on the air with climatologist Tim Ball.